أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن أولى الناس بإبراهيم للذين اتبعوه وهذا النبي والذين آمنوا والله ولي المؤمنين ودت طائفة من أهل الكتاب لا يضلونكم وما يضلون إلا أنفسهم وما يشعرون يا أهل الكتاب لم تكفرون بآيات الله وأنتم تشهدون يا أهل الكتاب لم تلبسون الحق بالباطل وتكتمون الحق وأنتم تعلمون وقالت طائفة من أهل الكتاب آمنوا بالذي أنزل على الذين آمنوا وجه النهار واكفروا آخره لعلهم يرجعون ولا تؤمنوا إلا لمن تبع دينكم قل إن الهدى هدى الله أن يؤتى أحد مثل ما أوتيتم ويحاجوكم عند ربكم قل إن الفضل بيد الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله واسع عليم يختص برحمته من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم ومن أهل الكتاب من تأمنه بقنطار يوده إليك ومنهم من تأمنه بدينار لا يوده إليك إلا ما دمت عليه قائما ذلك بأنهم قالوا ليس علينا في الأميين سبيل ويقولون على الله الكذب وهم يعلمون At the end of the last verse, we discussed the verse Inna awla an-nasi bi Ibrahima lalladhina tabauhu wa hadha an-nabiyyu walladhina amanu wallahu waliyyul mu'minin. And I promised you that in the next verse I'll discuss the same verse, particularly bringing to light the true full meaning of the word wali and various possibilities of its usage in connection with God and others. So let's begin with the same verse. There are two words which have the same infinitive meaning used in this verse. Number one is awla, and the number two is waliyul mu'minin. The meaning of the word wali is derived from the word wilaya or walaya. They are the original basic infinitive words, letters, let's say, the letters of the infinitive, which in this order mean something. What do they mean? This is the discussion we are going to undertake now. First of all, let's consider the construction of the word awla. Awla is again derived from the word wali, which means somebody close, or wilaya, which means nearness. So here, although the word wilaya also has other connotations, but in this particular construction, Ola, it means nearness, not friendship as it is understood, or help, or anything of that nature. Generally, the word nearness is used, which may have many connotations of its own. For instance, when we say, I am closer to him than you are, sometimes the meaning is obvious because you know the context of this usage. Sometimes the meaning is not as clear because the person who is using this phrase has some special meaning in mind. Here the word Ola has already been described by the Holy Quran previously. In what sense one can be closer to Abraham? So, in continuation of that meaning, we should understand the application of the word Ola, which means nearer and closer. It has been already discussed that as far as Abraham is concerned, blood relationship is not meant at all. It's not going to prove anything. Or descendancy from him is meaningless, because Abraham stood for certain values, and those were spiritual and religious values. The most prominent among them was his love of the unity of God and his perfect understanding of the unity of God, which was unadulterated, unmitigated, complete in itself. So, if you claim to be closer to Abraham, this should be the meaning of the word close, which should be debatable. So whoever is close to Abraham in those values for which he stood all his life and sacrificed everything dear to him, that person is bound to be closer to him than anybody else. So this is the essence of the entire discussion. Now in the second place, the word Waliyul Mu'mineen is used. Allah, Wallahu Waliyul Mu'mineen, which means Allah is the wali of believers. Now let's now discuss the word wali in all its various possible connotations and meanings. It has a very broad spectrum of usage in Arabic. But all the meanings are not applicable in this construction when it is possessed to God. Waliyul Mu'min, Allahu Waliyul Mu'mineen, the word wali is applied in relation to Allah with Mu'mineen. So Allah, Mu'mineen becomes possessive of God through the agency of the word wali. First meaning of wali, as we find in Arabic dictionary, is al-mataru yasqutu ba'da al-matari, al-muhibbu was-siddiqu wan-nasiru. And the plural of this is awliya. And this means, to begin with, such rain as follows upon rain, rain after rain after rain. So what connection or relationship has it got with the word wali as we understand? We understand the word wali, and correctly so, to mean that somebody is very friendly, somebody is very loving to someone, as it is also the connotation in Arabic. Wali also means muhib, one lover. So why should this word also mean the same word you mean al-matar, a rain which is incessant, or on the heel of one rain follows another storm, and so on and so forth, and you never see a dry period in between. So the meaning is that the true lovers or real friends are those whose benefit continues to flow in the directions of those whom they hold dear. And there are no dry periods. there is no latent hindrance in between, no gaps, no chasms in between. And a true friend is the one who is always good to his friend. Now, there may be some patches where you may feel that the friend is not your friend anymore, but if the friendship is true, that small patch would immediately be followed by another expression of love. So that is why not a continuous rain, but rain after rain is described. And this can be experienced in everyday life in true friendship. Sometimes, not only in friendship but also in other relationships which can be described as categories of love between father-child relationship, mother-child relationship, and things like that. Sometimes the parents become apparently angry. For a while they seem to be breaking away from their children and dissociating with them. Sometimes they boycott them. But there follows another rain which sometimes is even stronger than before, of expressions of love. So that is why this is a beautiful word described as we find it in the Arabic usage. So God has applied it in this background to his relationship with the believers. Sometimes the believers find themselves in a state where they think God has ceased to be kind to them. But that is only a temporary phase. This is what Hazrat Masih Maud has described in such depth and detail and warned his Jamaat that such times may come in your lifetime when you will feel sort of abandoned by God, when you will feel that as if God had no relationship, no care for you. But that also is an expression of love. He is trying you like sometimes you try your children. That doesn't mean that you have ceased to love them during that period of trial. That only means that you are decided within you, inside you, that let my child emerge successful from this trial and then I will show to him what love is. I'll shower love, bounties upon bounties, and expression of love after love would follow after this short period of trial is over. So here the word wali, of course it has relationship to the original usage in Arabic, but this is the true meaning. Why rain after rain, not a continuous rain? So walayat of God with the believers has exactly the same nature and the same connotation as the original usage of the Arabs is. Wali also has many connotations, other connotations. Wala or walaya, al-motiqo. Now here wali would mean in present participle form, in ism fa'il form, it will mean al-motiqo, which means the one who releases someone from bondage, emancipates someone, frees a slave, liberates him. All these meanings are also included in the word wali. Also it means ibnul am, son of one's uncle, or brother through, the first cousin, let's call it in English, but in Arabic it's called ibnul am, but first cousin from father's side, not from the mother's side. And Nasir, which means the one who helps others. So obviously you can see that all these meanings are not applicable in relation between God and the mu'mineen and the believers, because he is not your first cousin anyway, nor can he be treated as Nasir in the sense that he is below you. Sometimes wali, the word wali, has that connotation that someone who helps you because he is lowly situated compared to you. But God's help has a meaning of condescension. Condescends. What would be the infinitive of that word? Condescendingly, He helps you condescendingly. Not because he must or he is inferior to you. Again, wali also means muti, that is to say the one who obeys someone. And here again, God is not in the position of obeying anybody else. He is the master of all. So here the word wali should not be understood to mean that God obeys you. But in a sense he also obeys you. Again out of condescension, how do you say? I don't know the word, infinitive of this word. Condescension? Is it correct? Or? No. I know the word condescendingly, but what is the infinitive of this? That is what is missing me. To condescend. But it can't be used in infinitive form then. That is what we will find out later on. From the dictionary, please check up. The infinitives can be of two forms, one beginning with to. So you can't use them in the normal sentences, in the flow of the sentence starting with to. But there are other infinitives which you can use as sort of nouns, similar to this. So that is the condescendence. That is possible. That is what came to me. Condescendence is perhaps the closest word to it. So he does it in condescendence, if it is correct. But you know what I mean, of course. But still he obeys in a way. When he is mustajab. When you call him, he responds to your call. So that means in a way he also obeys you. He responds to your call. But because of his grandeur, of his magnanimity, not because he is bound to. Similarly, according to Rasul Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sometimes he obeys again in a very strange way. A dear servant of Allah, without having received a message from God that he would do that particular thing, claims that God is going to do that. It is also a way of ordering. He will do this, which means he is bound to do it. And Rasul Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells us that sometimes Allah loves his servants, his humble servants so much that out of his love he obeys to his call and does exactly as he claims God would do. So that again is a sort of ata, which is a connotation of the word wali. So with some of Allah's friends you also see expressions of such closeness as if God is following the calls and demands, and that we have seen many a time in the lifetime of Hazrat Rasul Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said this would happen and that would happen. Also we have seen this illustrated in the lifetime of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam. Sometimes his companions tell us that instead of having received a definite message from God, he said Allah would do it, all right. And God would do it like that. And that has also been witnessed among the companions of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam by way of prayer. Prayer is in fact the connotation, not an order, but the way things are said as if God had told them that he was going to do certain things in a certain manner. So they say, yes, it will happen. And it happens. So in a manner of speaking, this connotation can also be included in relationship between God and Mu'mineen when he claims that he is their wali. Now again, mostly in the Holy Quran, as I have studied, the word is used in one direction, in singular, and in one direction only. In singular, you don't find in the Holy Quran a mu'min being described as waliullah. But it is always Allah who is the wali. It has been mentioned in many places, but always in this direction, that Allah is waliul mu'minin. But in plural it has been used. Ala inna awliya Allah la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. That beware, behold, those who are true friends of Allah, true walis of Allah. Here the word is used in plural, not in singular. La khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. There is no fear for them and nothing to be sorry about, nothing to be repentant about. Both these are the connotations of huzn. Now I warn you against the word Ola. The word Ola is also found in the Holy Quran in a completely different connotation, completely different meaning. Because there the infinitive or the root word of this Ola is different from this one. In another place the Holy Quran says Ola laka fa Ola, which means be curse of Allah fall upon you, be you destroyed. Because here the word is originally from the word well. Waw, ye, lam. Well means destruction and wrath and annihilation as well. So there the grammarians tell us that there has been a taqleed. Ola here, according to the grammarians, is a verb. It is not afalut tafzeel like in the case of Ola, the first Ola which we have mentioned. We have studied in the verse, in where is that? Inna Ola Nas. There the word Ola has a completely different root. It is from Wali or Vilaya or Valaya. Not Valaya but Vilaya. Here the Ola is from well. But in Arabic sometimes some letters of a word are used in changed order. The order is changed a little bit when you make a verb out of it. So instead of using the same order of the letters, in the word Ola, this order has been changed a little bit. So it should have been Avayala. But because of certain letters which are understood to be diseased letters in Arabic, they are weak. They are sometimes handled in a manner that if put on a stretcher they will be changed from one position to another. So that is why this letter has changed, this word has changed its original form, and it seems as if it is derived from Wali, but it's not derived from Wali at all. Now in this context, let's once again turn to this whole verse after fully understanding the meaning. Inna awlan nase be Ibrahima lallazina tabawu wa hadha an-nabiyyu wallazina amanu. Ibrahim is described as closest to those allazina tabawuhu, who follow him. And the meaning is obvious. The relationship, blood relationship wouldn't mean anything here. If you follow him, you are closest to him. But here, it doesn't say that Rasul Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam is closer to him because he follows him. Because this statement ends here, and in continuation, a new statement begins, which says, "Wa hazan nabiyyo," and also this Prophet, which means not because he follows him, but because he is the champion of the same values in even a bigger way. So this special expression is a compliment to Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it should not be misunderstood that this is a statement which is dependent on the previous part of the clause. It is an independent statement of this carrying the same subject into a different domain or area. It says naturally those who are closer to each other, they are in character, they are the true close people. So those who follow Abraham, they will be close to him. If Ahle Kitab follow him, this is the subject being discussed, naturally they would be close to him. We don't monopolize Abraham. But there is another way of being close to him is by following Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because he is not only made in the same style, but he excels in all the good qualities which characterized Abraham. So Mu'mineen also here are mentioned in relation to their belief in Hazrat Rasul Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because a new and better model has emerged, so you follow him and that is enough for you. You get everything which belonged to Abraham plus some. That is the message conveyed in this special style of expression. Wallahu waliyul mu'mineen. Now this is a very beautiful verse. It is such a short space. It has said so many wonderful things. Now it reminds you that this debate in itself is meaningless. If it stays, it comes to a stop there. Who is closer to Abraham? Why Abraham? Why Abraham? Allah is the ultimate goal. The discussion should carry further forward, go on to lead to God, and the full, meaningful sentence should be, we take pride in being close to Abraham because Abraham was close to God. So those who follow Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they have achieved that objective. After that, this debate, whether they are close to Abraham or not, that is insignificant and meaningless and third rate. They have achieved the objective, which was the real objective of being close to Abraham. Having followed the holy founder of Islam, they have achieved this ultimate goal. So this is how this subject is brought to a stop, to a consummate end by declaring Wallahu waliyul mu'mineen. وَدَّتْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ لَا يُضِلُّونَكُمْ وَمَا يُضِلُّونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ. Many a time the people of the book yearn and desire, both meanings are contained in the word wud, as we will study it in detail shortly. So the meaning would be, many a time a portion of the Ahl Kitab, Ta'ifatun, a group, some of them yearn and desire that they could mislead you. وَمَا يُضِلُّونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ. What they succeed in is only that they mislead themselves. وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ, and they don't understand it. Now what the word would means, I'll explain it to you first, and then we'll turn for a more detailed discussion of this verse. Would means love. That's one meaning of the word would. In this sense, the word wadud is an attribute of God. He loves, he has the capacity, constant, permanent characteristic of loving. And the word would is not just a love which can be described as infatuation or something which has any sexual connotation in it. The word would has nothing of this. But it has a softness to this, not intensity. In the word hub, you find, of course it's a very wide word of usage, the word hub. It covers all possible meanings of the word love as known to us. But the word would is different from the word hub in one thing particularly, that in the word hub the meaning is more intense. But in the word would there is softness and mellowness. So Wadud is someone who is by nature kind and loving. And that expression of his, that characteristic of his would show itself in his relationship to everyone. If somebody is Wadud, he is Wadud to everyone. Even to his enemies, he would be forbearing, and fundamentally he would treat them with Wud, unless and until a time comes where he no longer can tolerate, and then that relationship would come to an end. But the word muhib cannot be used in this context, because one can be muhib of someone and may not be muhib of another. One is not by nature muhib. So Allah is never described as muhib, because there are some to whom he can never love. He would never love. But he can be wadud to all to begin with, because it is in his character, it is in nature to be wadud. So this is one difference, and there are other minor differences in shades of the usage, which I'll explain. According to Aqrabul Mawarid, Waddahu Yawadduhu means somebody loved someone or treated him with kindness. Like in Arabic, in Urdu we find the two words muhabbat and pyar. Pyar is a more wider word in application and softer than mahabba. In mahabbat you are completely taken over by a passion after which you have no control over yourself. So that has that intensity. In pyar, as we are in Urdu we know, just anybody who's dear, even mildly dear, we use the same word pyar for him. So here the wud, according to Al-Aqrab, carries both these connotations. The pronunciation of this word is very wide, varies, and all possibilities are acceptable. You can say wuddan, you can say viddan, you can say waddan. All are correct. Because in correct Arabic usage, this word has been pronounced with all these inflections. Waddan, wuddan, viddan. Similarly, wudadan, wadadan, and vidadan. Incidentally, let me tell you the difference between V and W. And what is waw in Arabic? Because there some beginners generally make mistakes. V in English is pronounced, it is a labio-dental word, which is, let's say, consonant. This is a labiodental consonant is the correct term, which means lips and teeth touch each other when you pronounce this word. While W is a bilabial consonant, which means both your lips are involved in pronouncing W. So you should never mix up V with W. V is a very, like, upper teeth and lower lip come into contact when you pronounce the sound V. But in W you say well. Teeth and lips never come into contact. So this is why some English children make some mistakes in the pronunciation of W. Because in English, W is pronounced in the same way as the R in English is pronounced when it begins, when a word begins with R. They always pronounce R with rounded lips like they pronounce W. So they say red, never red like we say that. So that is why you sometimes feel a difference of pronunciation between your pronunciation and that of an Englishman, but don't understand what is happening. So when you try to imitate him, you make mistakes. And you're caught as trying to be English. That is also despicable, of course. You must not try to be English. But you should always be very meticulous in pronouncing a language the way it is pronounced by the people who speak that language. It is not imitating them in the wrong sense. It is the correct way of speaking a language. So here I am telling you this because in our country mostly, and we belong to Pakistan and India, here and majority of us belong to Pakistan and India, this is some, I don't know, this distorted approach. Some of us think that if we speak a language the way those speak who are called Ahl-e-Zaban, the people of the language, that is an act, shameful act, which should be condemned. You shouldn't imitate anybody else. You should try to speak English in your Punjabi way or Urdu way or Sindhi way, and this is the correct way of doing it. It's wrong, absolutely false. But there are others who think that you should imitate only in their facial expressions and the difference of sound somehow, without knowing how they speak differently from you. So those are the people whose imitation is to be condemned, not are those who imitate correctly. So, one thing led to another. I was just telling you the difference between W and V. And in this connection, I spoke of a difference between R and W when they begin a word. They become the first letter. Now, the English children, to begin with, do not understand the difference between R and W because both are pronounced with rounded lips. Wed and well. So generally the English children say wed roses. When you ask them to say red roses, they will say red roses. Now you can try this on some children and you will be surprised to find this is correct in most cases. So W should never be misunderstood, mixed with V. And in Arabic there is no V sound. Now remember this. In Arabic there is fe, there is only one sound which is labiodental of the same category, which is fe. And there is no V in Arabic. So that is why our pronunciation of the Holy Quran there becomes wrong. Because we Punjabis in particular tend to pronounce W like V of English. So I have spoken so much just with that purpose, so that you may never forget this. Always pronounce Arabic wow like English W. So, but Other here, Wuddan is not Wuddan. Wuddan wa Vidadan can be read as Waddan wa Vidadan, Viddam wa Vidadan. All deflections are correct. Also, it can mean hub. The word would can also mean hub. It doesn't mean that it excludes the possibility of hub, and it's always applicable to the mild type of love which I have just described. According to the dictionary, sometimes the word would is exactly in the meaning of al-hub. Sometimes wadud also means muhib. Sometimes it is mentioned, it means kathirul hub, al-kathirul hub, a love which is very, not strong, but very full. Also the word would means to yearn for something and to desire something. In the Holy Quran, it is said, Rubama yawaddul ladhina kafaru. Many a time, those people who have rejected the message of the Holy Quran or the message of the founder of Islam, they desire that, they wish, not desire, they wish they were Muslims. Now, when do they wish? Not when they see goodness in the Muslims, but when they see them achieve some fruits of their labor and their faith. Like at the time of victories, when the worldly bounties are gathered and distributed among the Muslims after a successful defensive war, for instance. And sometimes when they see them more contented, happy, satisfied, when they see their way of life is so wonderful and peaceful. So these are the times when they wish they could be Muslims. And we have noticed this also in our relationship with many non-Ahmadi. They say you are false, we know that. But how come it you become so good? You see? So this wish works both ways. Sometimes they wish they could be one of you. Sometimes they wish that you could be one of them with all your goodness. So in this verse which we are discussing, this is the meaning. The second part is applicable. وَدَّتْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ لَا يُضِلُّونَكُمْ. They find something in you which is attractive, and they want to make you one of them. And here would means they desire, they love to see you as one of them. So the word yudillun means to turn you back to the path which you had left. To make you change your ways in name only, not in character. And also in some beliefs, of course. But there is something in you which they know is good, which they would not admit. So this desire is born out of this recognition of truth. And the following verses will explain the same phenomenon in more detail. Sometimes we say, the Holy Quran says, they know the truth and yet they reject it. So this is a very mild proof of the same thing. If they did not find any element of truth or any signs of truth among Muslims, why should they wish sometimes that they could be them? Or why should they wish that they could come to them and follow them instead of they following them? And this relationship is witnessed today by Ahmadis everywhere in the world, and this is the fundamental reason why they do it. They know within them that we are good. This is the message of this verse. या अहल किताबे लिमा तकफुरून बिआयातिल्लाह व अंतुम तशहदून. You have witnessed something definitely in Islam and the Muslims, which you know to be good. Then why do you reject the verses of the Quran, the signs of Allah, while you're inside you there are witnesses that the truth belongs to them. They are better people. They are different from you in the good sense of the word. Why do you cover the truth? The word libas, you know very well. In Urdu it is also used dress. Dress is used to cover you. So when you cover the truth or hide it, and also when you mix it up, then the word talbis is used in Arabic. Libas as against talbis means libas is just any dress used without any intention of hiding anything from somebody. But you just cover things with your libas. Here, talbis means to make truth appear like falsehood or falsehood appear like truth. The intention of coverage is to mislead others or to hide a fact from the common eye intentionally with malintention. So it's always used in bad and negative connotation, the word talbis. Now, let's now turn back to the three verses together. When we find the discussion of these verses in the classical commentaries, they take these verses separately, individually, and discuss them. What does Buddh means, what Katham means, what does Yudilluna means, and so on and so forth. And leave the matter at that. And try to imagine why the Holy Quran has said that Ahle Kitab do this and that and that. Obviously everybody can understand that three accusations are made against the Ahle Kitab. Three distinct, different accusations. So to justify these accusations, the commentators believe that they have to supply the substance to prove the accusations to be correct. So they search far and wide in the Bible and for examples here and there to find out what the Holy Quran may have meant and to prove that it's not just a claim, it also carries some proof along with it. But the word along with it is temporarily forgotten by them. They think proof has to be found and discovered by them for the Holy Quran. While I believe that the Holy Quran presents and carries its own proofs, and you don't have to search elsewhere. It always makes a claim and substantiates that claim so effectively, so positively and powerfully that you don't have to search for other proofs in favor of it. But once the point is made, of course, then you know the category of proofs which would be related to the statement. So you can also search far and wide, but in the light of the Holy Quran's illustrations, not in the light of what you imagine. So what I have discovered about these verses is that these three verses present a case of lafo nashar murattab. It's a term of grammar or oratory, the oratorial science, lafo nashar murattab, which means that three questions are raised, and in the same order, three answers are made in the following three statements, or two, or as many as they may be. So you make apparently no connection between them, but many a time it happens that there is a beautiful connection if you search for the connection. And this is exactly the style of the Holy Quran which has been adopted here in this case. 3 claims are made, and in the following many verses, not the 3 verses, following many verses, they are treated one after the other and proved beyond a shadow of doubt that this claim is not just a hollow claim. It is fully substantiated by the statements which are following. So now we have to connect the following verses with these verses, and then you will understand the meaning of Lafu Nashr. Again, these verses are treated by most scholars, all the scholars which I have studied, as having nothing to do with the unity, the question of unity which is being discussed, the character of Abraham which is being discussed, and the fundamental characteristic of Abraham, or the nature of Abraham, the second nature as has been mentioned, which is unity of God. So they think that matter has been dispensed with there, and now God turns to another issue altogether. First, God was telling us that Abraham was a symbol or a paragon for the belief in unity of God. Now this matter is dispensed with. Now God is turning to the Jews. First they were accused, and the people of the book, they were accused that they do not believe in, apparently they believe, but in essence, in actual, they do not believe in the unity which was the concept of Abraham, and which is also the only logical concept of unity which should be held by every sensible person. That ends there. Now begins the second accusation, or set of accusations. This is not so. According to what I have understood, it is the same subject of unity being discussed. And this is the second accusation against the Jews, that your concept of unity is so limited and so small that you create differences between man and man and people, and yet claim that you believe in one God. When you understand the explanation of these accusations in the following verses, then the whole meaning would emerge as in one totality, and then you will understand the grandeur of the Quranic expressions and the continuation and the threads of a continuing thread of meaning which sometimes travel under the surface, which are not visible to the eye, but they are always there. Now I'll explain them. I'll first connect the first verse with the following verse. وَدَّتْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ لَا يُضِلُّونَكُمْ وَمَا يُضِلُّونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ. This is their desire. But is it a desire implemented? This is the question to be asked and to be investigated. And secondly, whether truly it is they themselves who are misled, or they succeed actually in misleading the Muslims. These are the two claims raised. Now look at the following verse. وَقَالَتْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ آمِنُوا بِالَّذِي أُنزِلَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَجْهَ النَّهَارِ وَاكْفُرُوا آخِرَهُ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. They not only desire to mislead you, but they instruct their followers to believe in the Holy Quran, apparently, in the morning, and claim, yes, we have understood, it is truth revealed by Allah to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then to renegade and turn away from this truth in the end of the day, at the end of the day, so that you carry along with you some other Muslims back to your faith. You go join them as if you have accepted the truth,
then after a while you say this day doesn't mean a day as we understand. Of course, it means to begin with, in a period of time, you follow them and then come out expecting to bring along with you many others with the same doubts as you would you would express at the end, which will be a part of your design. So, وَدَّتْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ لَوْ يُضِلُّونَكُمْ is demonstrated in this verse. How they desire and how they implement that desire through a design. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. Of course, this means they come back to you. But they attempted it and they failed. What happened was, why are they themselves who are misled? Because when even apparently they accepted the truth and went back to their original positions, then of course they were misled again. So in the end, they ended with a bargain that for a time, for a while, for a short period, they joined the truth, but ended up again with the falsehood. So instead of deceiving the Muslims, true believers, they only deceived themselves. What they wanted to do to them, they have demonstrated that they could only do to themselves. So that is the one claim made and the one proof offered. Why should we search following our own imaginations what the Holy Quran may have meant by this? This statement is very clearly demonstrated in a sense that we understand the meaning very fully without any shadow of doubt left at all. The second statement is, Ya Ahl al-Kitabe lima takfuruna bi ayatillahi wa antum tashhadun. O people of the book, why do you reject signs of God wa antum tashhadun, while you see them to be true? Now when you make this claim, the Ahl Kitab, both Jews and the Christians, can rebut your claim by saying, it is just a claim. What do you mean? We don't see the truth. That is why we reject it. So this issue has been most beautifully dealt with by the Holy Quran in the following verse. It says, and it quotes them. قَالَتْ طَائِفَةٌ means a group, a part of the people of the book said this. And again, وَلَا تُؤْمِنُوا إِلَّا لِمَنْ تَبِعَ دِينَكُمْ. They also say and they admit this is what they claim. لَا تُؤْمِنُوا إِلَّا لِمَنْ تَبِعَ دِينَكُمْ. Don't follow anyone, but only those who follow you or your faith. So if anyone agrees with your faith, which you understand to be the faith, then you follow him, otherwise reject. So the Holy Quran says this is not the correct behavior of truthful people. Their principle is follow the truth wherever it is found. So if you stick to this principle, then you are bound to end up in this state that you will see the truth and you will not follow it because it doesn't belong to you. So you are treating truth as partially. Truth in relative terms. If a statement is already contained in the statements of your scriptures as you understand them, then you will accept it, or you are bound, you must reject them. This is again very understandable by the Ahmadis today, because many a time we find exactly the same opposition from those who disagree with us. They said, whatever our ulama have said of Islam, if you agree with them, we will follow you. If you disagree with them, we are going to reject you. That's all, that's the rigid position. So according to the Holy Quran, this position is tantamount to seeing the truth and yet rejecting it. So the Holy Quran rejects this claim by saying, when they instruct their people, La tuminu illa liman tabi'a dinakum, don't follow except those who follow your faith. They forget the fundamental principle. And with what principle? It says, Qul, O Prophet of Allah, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tell them, Innal huda hudallahi. The correct approach should have been that guidance belongs to Allah, not to you or any people, not to Israelites or anybody else in the world. This is the only sensible principle. Otherwise, a time may come or it may happen that you see guidance, you understand guidance to be the guidance, and yet you will have to reject it because it doesn't belong to you. In that spirit, Hazrat Rasul Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam has instructed us, al-hikmatu du'allatul mu'mine, that a word of wisdom is like a lost she-camel which belong to you. When you see that lost she-camel, you don't say, because I have discovered it with other people, so I will not have it, re-own it. You accept it because it belongs to you. So you should look at the truth as if truth belonged to you, wherever it is found. Not that you judge truth by searching your own pockets and saying, if this is in your pocket, then it is truth, otherwise not. So both these attitudes are exactly opposite to each other. So when the Holy Quran says, Qul innal huda hudallahi, this is what it means. The fundamental, never changing principle should be that guidance belongs to Allah. So wherever you find signs of a teaching belonging to God, you must accept it, whether it has been revealed to you or not. This is the meaning of tashhadun. Many a time you will notice things to be correct and you are bound to reject it because you have a different principle. And here they can't deny this because this is their principle. Not only the principle of the Jews, but the present-day Christians. They say, you show it from our book. If it is there, we'll accept it or we'll reject it. So this is wrong. Now the following statement of this verse should be taken in this light, but this is a verse which is highly debated among Muslim scholars because you can translate it in different ways. Not debated in the sense that there are groups opposed to each other, but debated in the sense that the scholars are not fully sure what it means. Some say this is possible and some say that is possible and some say all these are possible meanings, and still they can't somehow fully comprehend the meaning and can't convey it properly to others. The same difficulty will be found in this translation of Malak Ghulam Farid Sahib and the notes of commentary regarding to this verse. You immediately discover him to be in some difficulty. Now I'll explain to you, when I read the meaning, then you'll understand why it is difficult, because it doesn't convey anything. And obey none but him who follows your religion. Alright? Say, surely true guidance, the guidance of Allah, is that one be given the like of that which has been given to you. What does it convey to you? In fact, it leads you into another problem. That is why when we were revising the translation of Maulana Sher Ali Sahib, which is the most excellent translation in English ever made by anyone in the world, it still stands to be the most excellent thing. And still he also was with great difficulty in fully understanding the import. So we turned to other explanations and possibilities, and we offered a solution which is now, this solution is incorporated in some translations of the excerpts of the Holy Quran, which are made into other languages. But when further studying and investigating this verse, a meaning has dawned upon me, which is in consistency, complete consistency in accord with the whole thread of the meaning, and which is so clear and understandable that after that this debate should come to an end. The difficulty that translators face is threefold. Number one, they say, parentheses apparently are used in this verse, but it is not clear where the parenthesis should begin and where it should end. The following statement is ambiguous according to them as to who made this statement. So I'll explain to you this in detail, otherwise you will fail to understand. We know that the first part of this verse is a statement attributed to the Ahl Kitab. La tu'minu illa liman tabi'a dinakum. There is no doubt about it. Everybody is agreed on this. That this is a statement of Ahl Kitab. Qul innal huda hudallahi. Everybody is agreed on this. That this is a statement which Allah instructs Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to make in response to their claim. That's clear? Understand? Now, the following words, are they to be connected with the statement which God has asked Ahmad to make? Or the parenthesis ends here and the following statement again belongs to the Jews and the Ahl Kitab. This is the dilemma which is faced by every translator. So some say, as Mullah Ghulam Faridi Sahib has taken the position, that the parenthetic statement does not end here. Qul innal huda hudallahi. It runs into the following statement as well. Partly, not entirely. According to Malak Sahib, of course he would have studied other Ahmadiyya interpretations, possibilities, etc. We chose this. Like other scholars have also done it. I mean, there is no difference between here in Ahmadiyya attitude versus the others, because every Muslim scholar has pondered over this question and possibly tried various, various possibilities. Parenthesis should be explained to some of you who do not understand the meaning. Parenthesis means that you make a statement and make a stop for a while. Insert a new statement in between and then return to the first subject you were discussing. So here, those who believe in this parenthetic statement, they say, the Jews said, don't believe except in those who follow you. We monopolize truth. Truth should be judged according to whether we have it or not. That is all. Qul innal huda hudallahi. O Prophet, tell the Muslims as well as the Jews. We reject this statement. Nobody monopolizes truth. Truth should be only judged in its relation to God. If it is from God, then it is truth, otherwise it's falsehood. An yota, they say, begins the statement of the Jews again. That is what parenthesis means here. That Jews used to say, Wala tuminu illa liman tabi'a dinakum, don't follow anyone except those who follow your faith. An yota ahadum misla ma utitum, lest somebody else should also be given something like you have been given. Now what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. Has it conveyed a message to you? They say don't follow anyone, but those who follow you, lest somebody else should be given something which is similar to you. It doesn't carry any sense. So this has to be wrong. It should not be discussed as a possibility, because it leaves you in confusion, and the Holy Quran is not a book of confusions. It's a book which removes confusions. Any translation which is confusing has to be wrong. That is why I don't accept this possibility as a possibility. Or yuhajjukum inda rabbikum. That again, they say, is the statement of the Jews. Otherwise, they will debate the issue with you in presence of your Lord. What does it mean? Again, confusion built upon confusion. So it has to be rejected as such. Some other scholars, and our 5-volume commentary has references to all these, take the position that or yuhajjukum is now the statement of Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that parenthesis stops at one place, the Jews take over as if, and their statement reappears, then it finishes here, and or yuhajjukum again becomes the statement of the Jews. And some say, no, the statement of the Jews ends in the first place, and then entirely it is the statement of Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as instructed to him to be made by God himself. But there again, the meaning which they attribute to this is not understandable, how it should work. With the grace of Allah, I feel that God has enlightened me on this, and according to what has dawned upon me now finally, the meaning is not only very clear, but also in consistency with the flow and the discussion of the subject. It means, number one, La tu'minu illa liman tabi'a dinakum is the statement of the Jews and the Christians, and it ends there. From then on, the instruction of God given to Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam begins. And till the end of the verse, the statement of the Jews is not brought back. There is one thing which you must understand clearly. And the meaning would be, O Prophet of Allah, Qul innal huda hudallahi. You stick to this position as against theirs. That we reject your claim that unless something is found in your books, it has to be falsehood. And we take a counter claim that whatever belongs to Allah is truth. If you stick to that statement, you disarm them. Because if they reject it, then they turn away from God. Who in his sanity can reject this statement that the criterion for truth is only this, whether it belongs to Allah or not? Not whether it belongs to Jews or Hindus or Buddhists, because that will lead you to confusion upon confusion and counterclaim upon counterclaim. So this is what a beautiful, clear-cut rebuttal and indefensible position is taken by the now clear-cut rebuttal is taught to the Muslims, against which the position of the Ahl Kitab becomes indefensible. The following part of the statement further explains why you should do it. It says, if you slip from this fundamental statement position, then what would happen? No, that will come later. Ayyota ahadum mithlo ma utitum. This is the explanation of the Holy Prophet to them, that this is not truth, that somebody should be given like you are given. Why should somebody be given like you are given? God is free to give guidance to any people as he pleases. why must he follow you? So here an means not that. And in Arabic, remember, this is also this is exactly supported by the usage of the Arab. Sometimes the word an is used in this sense to convey, as against that, not this. So the meaning would be, the truth is that which belongs to Allah, not that somebody must be given what you have been given, or somebody must be given something like you have been given. Why should that be the criterion of truth? Even if somebody is given something other than what has been given to you, even if somebody has been given from Allah something contradictory to what you find in your books, still the issue to be decided is whether Allah has given that truth or not. Allah is free to do whatever He pleases. Further it says, قُلْ إِنَّ الْفَضْلَ بِيَدِ اللَّهِ. On two counts, now but let me first finish. Or yuhajjukum in the rabbikum. If you slip from this fundamental position and go to their field of proving your truth from Bible only, then you will be lost. Then they will debate the issue in presence of your Lord, and you will have nothing to answer. You will be caught in a mire, you will bog down. So don't fight the enemy on his battlefield. This is the principle which is told to us. Drag him to your battlefield and choose such a battlefield which cannot be refused by the enemy. You can refuse it to be dragged into their field by just claiming, no, this is not no criterion. If this is the criterion for you, it would be the criterion for the Buddhist, for the Confucianist, for everybody else. So, the unsensible thing, come to the sensible thing. Let's decide, we are bound to prove only this much, whether our claim belongs to Allah or not. They will have to accept it, or they will be rejected automatically as wrong people. Once they accept it, then you should tell them, why should Allah remain limited to your book? He is the master of everything. He has unlimited expressions of truth. He can change anything, any teaching. And moreover, He can change the people whom He gives the truth. Innal fadla biyadillahi. Today He is kind on Israelites, tomorrow He can be kind to other people. On what principle you limit the mercy of Allah to a certain line some certain group of humanity living in a certain area? Wallahu wasi'un alim. Now this resolves the whole issue, and it explains and proves that this position which I am taking is exactly the position taken by the Holy Quran. It says, Wallahu wasi'un alim. Allah is not only all-knowing, but He expands things as well. Not that once He has spoken of truth, He remains limited to it, and with the passage of time, nothing changes. If you see the world of God, it is expanding. Why should He remain limited to the religion of Israelites while He is wasi? So in the light of this, when you see the fundamental differences between Jews and Christians and Muslims, you will see that they lie in the same line of expansion of teaching. More is revealed, wider perspective is given in the teaching, which stands on a higher ladder of evolution. For instance, as you well know, the Jews were taught to take their revenge, tooth for tooth and eye for eye, and no forgiveness. Now why should God remain, this is the meaning of this verse, why should God remain limited, and why should you reject Christianity? Because Christianity doesn't teach you this. Wallahu wasi'un alim, Allah has given a different injunction. In fact, contrary to yours. But if you realize, fully investigate, you will find that it is not contrary, but it's an expansion of the same teaching. To begin with, you are given the right of revenge. You end up by being given the right of forgiveness. And you are made to practice both these teachings for a long period in your history. So it's not a contradiction, it's an expansion of the teaching. First revenge, then forgiveness, then further expansion in Islam, where it says, وَمَنْ أَفَا وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. You are of course given the right to forgive, but only on the condition that your forgiveness promotes reformation and does not encourage crime. This is not only an expansion but also a perfection. So the question, how far God will go on expanding the teaching, also will resolve. Expansion to the extent that you reach perfection. After that, no more expansion. Now apply this principle to the illustration which I have given to you, then you will begin to understand exactly what it means and why the Muslim faith and the Muslim claims are so logical. There are no tall claims or no arbitrary decisions. It just is a teaching which confirms with the inner logic of man. Expansion should be acceptable in teaching if it is by way of development. Expansion should not be rejected if it is by way of evolution. But it must end where the point of perfection is reached. Where however much you try, you cannot further expand it. And for every teaching, there is an area of limitation, and it travels towards that point, and after that it cannot be further expanded. For instance, this particular part, the last one which I have mentioned, you are permitted, this is the perfect teaching of the Holy Quran, you are permitted to take revenge. That is the Jewish teaching. They say, we accept it, but further we will not accept. Now comes the Christian teaching. Of course, forgiveness is good, and you should prefer it to revenge. The Holy Quran says, yes, this is also good, but not all. You must not exercise forgiveness where it may promote criminal tendencies, encourage crime. You are only permitted to forgive where forgiveness leads to reformation. فَمَنْ أَفَا وَأَصْلَحَ, that is the permission of the Holy Quran. So if somebody tells you that, all right, why not expand the Islamic teaching further and new Sharia should not be revealed, the answer is, try your hand at it. How will you change it? Nobody can. I assure you, I have tried my hand at this. I have challenged, softly, mildly, not in a haughty way, but I have raised this question before the Baha'is, before Christians, Jews, and they're always nonplussed. I say, look here, this is the teaching, try to improve it and further expand it. You can't. So this is the beauty of the Holy Quran, and this is exactly the meaning of this discussion. What a stupid stand you are taking. If the truth is found with you, if something is found with you, that is truth, otherwise not. You try to limit God. God goes on expanding. And also it is God to decide upon whom to bestow His mercy and His kindness. He may choose a different people from you. Now this is a universal teaching, acceptable to all humanity. The rest is to be rejected. This is the second illustration of this lafo nashr murattab, as I said. But I think it's time now for us to stop here. We'll follow it up tomorrow, inshallah.